Greetings. This is the introduction for the interior design course, the uh, environmental interior design course, sociocultural aspects of design, 335. So this is a course that's sort of unusual. It's actually based on a graduate level class uh, because we're integrating anthropology, geography, interior design, and looking largely at issues of physical objects, the way in which physical objects are valued. In other words, the implications, or if you would, the symbology of objects, and also in larger specter, sort of this idea of phenomenology in the sense of the way that we look at things, the way that we interpret things, the way that we filter things in the world around us. In other words, the way that we shape our reality and understand our reality. Just as a quick aside, I'm semi-retired, I guess you'd sort of say. I just moved a couple of months ago to Carson City, Nevada, after over 50 years in Hawaii. So this is sort of a shock. But one of the really fascinating things about Nevada is this whole issue of gambling, the pervasive nature of gambling. Even if you go into a grocery store, there'll be a niche in the side with 20 or 40 slot machines, and almost invariably there's someone playing on them. There's casinos all over the place. So the casinos many of them are in trouble. And that's actually going to sort of spin into a shift in the course because traditionally in this class, what we've looked at is issues of tourism in Hawaii, usually in the context of Honolulu, frequently either Waikiki or Kaka'ako. I'm going to do a shift this time. And the reason being is one is because just selfishly I'm here and now in Nevada. But also I've come across recently several texts because I became interested in this whole issue of the shape and place of casinos, where casinos are, especially when you go into casinos, there's a very distinctive interior design to them. Even the little niches that you see in grocery stores or 7-Elevens have, there's interior design issues involved in gambling, which to be honest, had never occurred to me. I don't gamble. My wife and I used to occasionally go to Vegas to have good time with family, but we just people watched. Having said that, I got interested in this having moved here. And so I started looking into this whole issue of interior design and casinos, or if you would, interior design and gambling. And there's two texts that really stood out to me. One is Scholl's Addiction by Design. This is a text that's about a little over 10 years old now. She actually makes an interesting case that gambling, especially machine gambling in Nevada, well, I guess everywhere, but especially in her case, she's looking in Las Vegas, is largely based on interior design manipulation. Now, we'll see this later in the semester when we get into look in a little quick way in things like malls, with the idea that retail shopping is, shaped in part by the use of interior design elements to manipulate shoppers. This has been around for ages, and to be honest, we talk about it, but I hadn't really thought about it too seriously. Scholl makes an interesting point because she actually sort of puts part of the ethical onus of gambling on interior designers that, by virtue of the way they've designed casinos, draw people in to spend money in casinos. Desmond Lamb's much more recent work is actually looking largely at Macau. But his is actually, if you're interested in this at all, his is the one I would buy, not so much just because it deals with casinos, but because it's a truly cross-cultural study, which is the main emphasis of this class. He's looking at how gambling is portrayed and who gambles, largely in the context of Macau, but also China and also in Las Vegas. So he's doing a lot of integration of cultural aspects, very importantly in his view, symbolic aspects and design aspects that you see in interior design in casinos globally. So I find his work to be fascinating, not just for casinos, but also just in general. But Scholl's work is probably more ethically, explicitly targeting interior designers that are involved in casino design. So something interesting, because I don't think people, I don't know, we've never particularly covered it. I don't think interior designers really see themselves as usually in being in ethical quandaries when they take on a client. Tourism maybe to a certain extent, but casino gambling, especially what she's pointing out is people that are addicted to gambling, that the folks that do the design elements that draw them into casinos are at some point at least partially responsible for that scenario. An interesting concept and an interesting, discussion of ethics that I think that we usually avoid in interior design because I don't think it shows up. Anyways, original context of the class. We have sort of 4 books, or with 3.5. Hall's original work from the 1960s on hidden dimension has never been surpassed. It's still sort of the baseline. And what he's looking at is a whole issue of sort of the phenomenological or perceptual drive behind reality that shapes the way that we look at the world around us, which of course is central to interior design in every way, shape, and form. Very easy read. You should be able to find it digitally or a hard copy, for just a couple of bucks, if not free. Gallagher's House Thinking is a sort of a modern version of this. She's actually comparing it both British and American homes, but she's actually looking at the symbology of the house, the symbology of rooms, the symbology of furniture and objects in rooms, and how they actually are shaped by the way that we perceive, among other things, what is a house, what does living in home mean? And she details this in great detail. Miller's work is a little more technical, but especially if you're an interior designer, I think it's a critical one. He's one of the few that's actually looked at the idea of objects, both from a culturally specific and also sort of in a larger cross-cultural perspective. He's an anthropologist, and he's got some fascinating websites if you want to take a look at those. But this work on stuff is excellent, and I highly recommend it. And it's again, all these are easy reads, and none of these are technical. His is probably the most fascinating because of the idea that we tend to think of objects, I think, in interior design as sort of being non-cultural. That they're driven by such things as aesthetics or color matching and stuff like that. He's pointing out that that's not really the case. The last of these is based on the work that I did in terms of compiling the Thrums annuals. Don't panic. There's a number of volumes in here, but you're only reading a couple of articles per volume. This comes in when we're talking about the Hawaiian landscapes. So get these. They're available on Amazon Kindle format. So they should be. I think they're only $1 or something like that. So again, it's not a huge outlay of your cash. Daniel's book is a great one in looking at Japanese house. In some ways, it was an intentional alternative to the idea of the Japanese aesthetic that was real popular in Euro-American design in the late 20th, early 21st century. And you still see this a lot, for example, in things like restaurant design. But she points out that the reality of the Japanese home, and having been in Japanese homes, she's entirely right, totally don't look like what we image them, from, Architectural Digest or something like that. Real clever book, very interesting. And again, she intentionally contrasts the idea of what you might call Euro-American interpretations of Japanese aesthetics and design versus how Japanese actually see aesthetics and design. So again, a fascinating book. And again, I already mentioned Lamb's and Scholl's books. Okay, how the course works. Let me just scroll through this real quickly here. Sorry about that. Major part of the course is sort of 2 things. One is a series of what I call critical thinking papers. You've got a template here in the syllabus that actually says what I'm looking for. What you have is we're going through a whole mess of material in related disciplines, all themed in this idea of cultural landscapes, largely both at the idea of general landscapes. We think, for example, as we'll see, since I now live right next to it, Virginia City, and the idea of the Wild West landscape of the United States. But also shrinking that down, for example, as Daniels looks at the landscape of a living room or a bathroom, the landscape that Lamb looks at in terms of the interior of a part of a casino. And all these are landscapes, and we're looking at this largely, at least initially, from the background of geography. Since I'm a cultural geographer by training, my specialty is Hawaiian cultural landscapes and how different perceptions of Hawaiian landscapes have sort of led to a lot of the issues we see here in Hawaii. And so in that context, that's we're going through a bunch of different material. And so as we go through, I've got the schedule, at least the first part of it here. As we're going through these first chunks or modules, if you would, of the material, as we're going through it, what I want you to do is if you see something that's of interest, whether it's something you agree with, disagree with, something that relates to you professionally or personally, consider using that to making a critical thinking paper. The critical thinking papers are basically taking the material, making a point of view, and then basically supporting your point of view. So there's a set of criteria up here in the syllabus, but you've got 5 of these due during the semester. Please check with me before you start on one. In general, what I find is people try to do stuff that's way too large. Like the landscapes of Meta or something like that. That's it'd be a 1 billion-page paper. So check with me first. But you've got 5 of these due. Now, the other thing we're doing this semester is a project. I always do these. And the reason is very simply, I'm always worried by the fact that there's sort of, I don't want to use the word artificiality, but there, to a certain extent, academia is not grounded in the practical realities of the world that you guys exist in. I assume some of you already work professionally in interior design. If not, I'm sure most of you have jobs or maybe already careers in place. But what I want to do is I always want people to be able to take the material we're using in class and actually relate it to a particular project. Now, usually that develops during the semester. In this case, when I moved here a couple of months ago, something absolutely struck me as being an absolutely fascinating example of something very different, for example, from what we're usually doing. But on the other hand, it really isn't. In recent years, we've looked at things like, reuse of malls, reuse of various structures. We're going to do sort of something similar. Here in Carson City, which is the capital of Nevada, it's a very small town. It's only about 40,000 people. So it's sort of interesting. It's not much larger, for example, than Kahului, Wailuku, in terms of number of people, and yet it's the state capital, not Vegas with its 2 million people or 3 million or 6 or whatever it is, or even Reno, which is I think 750,000 or 1 million total in area. This little tiny town is the state capital, and it's a very pretty, cute little town. Much of it actually is based, at least in the center section, on the late 19th century, because this was part of the whole Comstock Lode silver rush of this part of Nevada in the 1860s through basically 1930s. One of the side effects of that is that gambling really isn't the centerpiece of a lot of what goes on around here the way it is in the larger cities like Reno or Vegas. Having said that, right across the street from the state capitol is this large, it takes over a block, a space of a casino called Ormsby House, which apparently was built in the 1990s and then closed almost immediately and has never been opened since. I'm not really too sure. As we get into the semester, I got to dig in a little bit more about, just exactly what the hell's going on with it. But it's a fascinating example of a casino that failed, which is now becoming quite common, especially in the larger areas. But it was never, the people have tried to figure out how to reuse, and they've never been able to. So we're going to do that, and that's going to be our project. So unlike most semesters, when the project comes out later in the semester, in this case, I will write up the project proposal fairly early on. We call these RFPs, or requests for proposals. So we'll assume that the X, I haven't figured out who yet, really wants to reuse this property since someone's paying taxes on it, and that's going to be our project. Is how to reuse what was a casino. So this is going to be a little bit different, but I think it's an interesting structure architecturally. It's an interesting structure sort of historically too. So it makes it a little bit different from the classic sort of Waikiki tourism that we do, but to a certain extent, I think that thing's sort of been beaten into the ground anyways. This is something different. And among other things, given the number of casinos that are collapsing, this is something that's becoming an issue more so maybe in Reno, where they don't tend to tear the buildings down right away. This whole issue of casino reuse is becoming a major source of discussion for architects. I'm not sure interior designers have been involved yet. So we're sort of getting ahead of something that I think is per usual, it's actually a real world situation. It's a real world issue. And we're going to look at it from within the context of the materials that we've covered in this semester. So that's the major part of the work that we do, that you guys are going to do for grades. There's also a number of videos. I want you guys to do reaction papers. So you'll have videos assigned. And what will happen is when those are assigned, I want you to react to them. You don't get graded on the content. You don't get graded on how long your reaction is. I just want you to read the questions that I'm posing when you watch the video and then answer the questions. That's the reaction papers. Reaction papers are handy for one main purpose. They're easy to grade, one. Secondly, if you don't do the reaction papers, you're not watching the videos, then I can guarantee you're going to fail the class, because if you can't keep up on a 15-minute video during the semester, then there's no way in hell that you're going to keep up on the course materials. So the reaction papers are handy because they're a good warning sign of time management on your parts. So I would suggest in this semester especially, watch the video presentations that my video post for each material, but also do the reaction papers. They're a key way that you keep up with sort of the context of the material we're going through. So that's pretty much how the course goes. It's set up on a schedule. I would stay to the schedule. I'm not going to be rigorous about things being due that day, but if you hand in the critical thinking 2 weeks late, you're gonna get a grade penalty. Because I ended up with a bunch of classes this semester, and I don't have time to fool around with people procrastinating on sending assignments in because they're spaced out the semester for a reason. You cannot do the critical thinkings all in the last week of class. It just isn't going to happen. They're going to look like junk, and they're going to get a grade that reflects that. So keep pace, keep up. If you have questions, be sure and contact me. You can see what I'm doing in terms of research on my own on the website, though I have to update that with my Nevada projects that I'm on. But be sure and contact me if there's an interest. We can set up Zoom meetings for folks and do like Q&As or whatever. So I'm around. I'm just on a 2-hour ahead of you guys schedule. And it's now, let's see, at almost noon. It's now 21 or 28 degrees out. So next time you complain about Hawaiian weather, think about us poor buggers here.